So let's just talk about your views on where rates are going from here, and it relates
Yeah.
to the excessive amount of debt and what
Yeah.
the economy can't handle.
Yeah.
You can't handle higher rates, economy, right? I mean,
Well, it sort of
So
feels
this-
that way, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is that because of the debt scheme that we're running, and here we are in a growing economy with a deficit or national debt growth to GDP being at levels historically associated with the depths of recession.
Right.
This is a stimulative
This is
type
the good times.
right. And so when you go into recession, it's obvious that the deficit will absolutely explode.
Right.
So you would have not just 6 or 7% of GDP, it might be 12 in the next recession. And you just can't float that many bonds. So if the Fed and the central bankers were to disassociate and go back to free market, I'm absolutely convinced that rates would rise in the next recession at the long end. They would rise at the long end because we have seen the market is already rejecting the level at which the Fed is setting rates. Look at the repo market back on September 17th. I mean, here's the Fed setting the Fed funds rate, everything's fine, and then out of the blue, one morning, the repo rate goes from 2% to 10%. What's that saying? It's saying that there isn't demand for this 2% under natural market forces. So the Fed comes in, now they're pumping in hundreds of billions of dollars in reserves, and they like to say that it's not quantitative easing. It's kind of funny how this semantic game has changed. They called it quantitative easing because they didn't want to call it monetization. That's why they called it quantitative easing. Now they don't want to call it quantitative easing because that sounds like we're back in the soup again. Right? But I think interest rates, they bottomed in 2016 at the long end, and then they started to rise, and they were rising at about 100 basis points per year, and I thought that was an appropriate clip. Yeah. And then the Fed did a 180-degree U-turn in January from where they were in December in just a 4-week period, and went from this ridiculous sequential rate hike thing that we're talking about for the next couple of years, and quantitative tightening, $50 billion a month as far as the eye can see, to exactly the opposite. Right. And Jay Powell, at one of his more recent news conferences, where it's funny, his philosophy on press conferences is like the shape of a funnel. Say less and less and less and less at every conference, because when he was very fulsome in his remarks back in the fourth quarter of last year, he got a lot of egg on his face because he was just so totally wrong.
Yeah.
On
balance
where
sheet
things
on
were
autopilot.
But he did say, when asked a fairly specific question, will we go to negative interest rates in the United States, he was pretty forceful in saying no.
So that means we know it's going to be yes.
Well, no. He says they're going to do large-scale asset purchases, which is quantitative easing on steroids, and I believe that that's what they're going to do, which means they're not going to let the rates rise.
Right.
So we're in this weird situation right now where rates have bottomed for the year. We thought that back in August. They'll rise to the point that inflicts concern in the minds of the Fed, and then they will start to manipulate them lower. So you have to have this idea about long-term interest rates, that they have to rise to a level that really motivates action, and then you have to play them for going down. So it's a very tricky environment. I think the 10-year Treasury should be at 6% in the next recession if the market would let it price that way. But that would just be so devastating to the economy that they won't let that happen.
So if we can then think out, the term end game, I mean, there never is an end game, but it's how does this, the question is, how does this end? Because the Fed will never let that happen, but yet it's not sustainable. So eventually, the bond vigilantes will overwhelm the central banks.
The world is so full of things that are long-term, obviously fatal, but over the short term, it doesn't seem to matter. Look at the negative interest rates in the ECB. This is absolutely fatal to the insurance industry. And the banking industry. In the United States, we have this problem that we have all this deficit, but people have been talking about this for decades, right? And it's not going to be a problem. Well, it's going to be a problem when you have this massive amount of economic trouble in the next recession, and you're going to have to counter it with an inflationary policy. And the inflationary policy will be universal basic income. I mean, it is amazing how the frog is being cooked in the pot relative to this free money concept, because when Bernanke said helicopter money back in the day, saying we'll never have deflation because we have the printing press, people were horrified. I mean, they thought, this is unbelievable. I mean, we're Zimbabwe over here. What are we talking about? And now there are people running for president who are getting donations, who are still on the debate stage, who are talking about universal basic income right now. They're talking about it. And in the next recession, I think there will be such a backlash against the establishment and the policies that we've been running that I think there will be an inflationary monetization scheme where you actually send money to people. George W. Bush did that twice, you know. He sent people money. People don't remember that. It was a few $100s. It went to like 98% of the population. And the idea was, you know, go buy a tie or something.
Right.
And
there was cash for clunkers, too.
Cash for clunkers, yeah. That was sort of a giveaway program, too, although you had to surrender the car you didn't want. Right. I mean, so it was really kind of just a free money program.
Maybe it'll be cash for lawn furniture soon.
Could be.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's a policy idea.
Yeah, you have to pay someone to haul it away. Maybe they could pay you. But I think that's kind of the end game, unfortunately. And
which would suggest stagflationary. I mean, a whole different economic regime. I mean, inflation. Obviously, inflation expectations are extremely low. Yields are low. No one can see inflation coming for these good reasons. But it's
just like people couldn't see inflation ever going away.
Yeah.
In the 1970s. People thought that it was the dragon was never going to be slayed.
Right. That's
why in 1984, there was a 14% long-term interest rate. The CPI was below 4%, below 4%. And people didn't want to buy the 14% treasuries because they were convinced that this 4% inflation was very temporary.